Hello and welcome to Monster Abilities in Pathfinder 2nd Edition Part 3. In this video we'll be discussing Ferocity, Frightful Presence, and Trample. Ferocity is an ability commonly found in orcs, cyclops, and animals such as badgers and boars, and allows the creature to stay conscious and in the fight even after being reduced to 0 hit points. The ability costs 1 reaction. With the trigger, the monster is reduced to 0 hit points. And with the effect, the monster avoids being knocked out and remains at 1 hit point, but its wounded value increases by 1. When it is wounded 3, it can no longer use this ability. So the way it works is the first time a creature with Ferocity suffers enough damage that would normally kill it, it can spend its reaction to instead stay alive at 1 hit point. And when it does so, its wounded value increases by 1. In most cases, monsters are considered dead at 0 hit points, and you don't need to worry about the wounded and dying conditions unless the GM feels they need to. For example, if it's an orc that is also a prominent NPC, then the GM might want to track their wounded and dying conditions, but in most cases, this notation that says that Ferocity increases wounded by 1 is just a counter that places a limit on how many times a creature can use Ferocity. After their 3rd use, they're done. Now, this doesn't mean that the first 3 times they're reduced to 0 hit points they get to shrug it off and stay fighting. Always remember that this costs their reaction, and each creature only gets 1 reaction per turn. So, if one player reduces an orc to 0 hit points, that orc might spend their 1 reaction to use Ferocity and stay alive, but if another player hits that orc and deals them a single point of damage before that orc's next turn, then they can't use Ferocity and will be killed or knocked unconscious if the GM prefers. Reactions are granted at the start of each turn, so a creature cannot use Ferocity more than once per round. Likewise, this reaction might be shared among different abilities. For example, if an orc uses their reaction to perform an attack of opportunity, then they will not be able to also use Ferocity until the start of their next turn. Frightful Presence is an ability common to dragons and some undead like liches. This is an aura ability that creates a zone around the monster and strikes fear in the heart of anyone who approaches them. The first time a player enters this zone, they must make a will save versus the listed DC. For example, young red dragons have an entry that says, Frightful Presence, 90 feet, DC 27. Whenever someone moves within 90 feet of a young red dragon, they must roll a will save versus DC 27. Once a player is subjected to a monster's Frightful Presence, they are immune to its effect for 1 minute, which is typically long enough for most combat encounters, so you shouldn't need to roll this more than once per fight, even if the player leaves and re-enters that aura. And this is a per monster effect. So if the party was fighting 3 red dragons, they would need to roll 3 saves, each made when the player enters 90 feet of that dragon. On a critical success, nothing happens. They shrug it off. If they roll a success, they still receive the Frightened 1 condition. On a failure, they receive Frightened 2, and on a critical failure, they receive Frightened 4. Contrary to somewhat common belief, the Frightened condition does not make you turn and flee from the monster. Instead, it applies a penalty equal to its value to all checks and all DCs. So, while Frightened 2, you subtract 2 from basically every time you roll a d20, including all of your attack rolls, skill checks, and saving throws, and also subtract 2 from all of your DCs, including armor class, save DCs, and the spell DC that others roll against to resist your spells. At the end of every turn, the Frightened condition reduces by 1 until it wears off. And last, when it comes to metallic dragons and other good aligned creatures that have Frightful Presence, some GMs may prefer to describe its effect within the narrative as an overpowering sense of awe and majesty instead of fear, but mechanically it still counts the same as Frightful Presence and does impose the Frightened condition. And some creatures, typically large animals like dinosaurs and elephants, have an ability called Trample that allows them to charge through an area, stomping any smaller creatures unfortunate enough to be in their way. When using Trample, the creature spends 3 actions and then strides double its speed. During this action, it can freely move through the space of creatures of a listed size, and those creatures must roll a basic reflex save versus a listed DC or suffer the effects of a listed strike. For example, the Brontosaurus has an entry that says Trample, 3 actions, huge or smaller, foot, DC 29. it can spend all 3 of its actions on a turn to stride at double its speed, which would be a total of 70 feet for a Brontosaurus, and can freely move through the space of any creature of the listed size. In this case, the listed size is huge or smaller, so the Brontosaurus can move 70 feet and trample over all creatures in its path that are size huge or smaller, and each of those creatures must pass a basic reflex save versus DC 29 or face the effects of a listed strike. In this case, the listed strike is foot. So basically, Trample allows the Brontosaurus to make a foot attack against everyone whose square it moves through, but instead of it making attack rolls, all of the targets roll reflex saves. And these are basic reflex saves, so on a failure, they suffer 2d8 plus 13 damage, on a critical failure, they suffer double that, and on a success, they still suffer half that, and on a critical success, they suffer no damage. Before we close, I'd like to take a moment to thank all of my patrons. These videos would not be possible without their continued generosity and support. Members of the How It's Played Patreon community receive special benefits like exclusive content and getting to vote on the topics I cover. Visit the links shown at the top of the screen and in the description if you'd like to know more. If you would like to support this channel and help it grow, the easiest way to do that is by subscribing and clicking the bell icon so you get notified when new videos release. And I can always be reached through Twitter and Facebook too. Thanks for watching, take care, and happy gaming.